This is a 2000 Dodge Ram 1500 4x4. We're going to switch out the exhaust on this. We want to switch it out from a single exhaust to a dual exhaust. On the floor here we have the single exhaust that we use the Sawzall to cut out of there. So we made a cut up front there between the Y pipe and the catalytic converter. We got another one here at the front of the muffler and another one there at the back, and then we removed the single exhaust. There it is from back to front in its entirety. What we want to do is we want to switch this over to a dual exhaust. What we have up the front there is we've got two separate pipes that are coming into the catalytic converter, one out to our Dynamax muffler, two out to, this is all the factory tubing that I've ordered for this truck for the dual exhaust on both sides. We'll probably end up using those two separate pipes coming off the manifolds, remove the catalytic converter, and continue those two pipes into our Dynamax muffler here. Two in, two out. One of the things we want to highlight with this job is the catalytic converter. I suspected that this thing is plugged, and the reason that I suspected it was plugged was because we kind of seem to be gradually losing power with the truck as we're driving it. I also think now that we've removed the catalytic converter that this may have contributed to some other problems that we had, where I thought I had some transmission problems. I think it contributed to that. We had some backfiring issues, mild backfiring issues with backfire from time to time. We had a rich bank one condition that we had done some other things to remedy, and the code did go away, but then it resurfaced again. I think this was part of the problem for some of those conditions as well. My recommendation is if you got an old truck like this and it still has the factory catalytic converter in there, you're probably either going to want to remove it or replace it. When we take a look inside here, we see that my suspicions were correct, and it looks like it's pretty much plugged right off. I expect that this will be like an entirely different truck once we've changed this exhaust. Not only are we switching it from single exhaust to dual exhaust, but this thing's plugged up, and once all that restriction's gone, I expect that we're going to gain some pretty good horsepower here. This is one of the headers that we had, and you can see that it was damaged from being shipped. That wasn't protected, and it got a ding in there. It's damaged. This is our replacement pipe here, and that bevel doesn't match. If we go to try to put this bevel on here, this does not match. That doesn't match to this, and this is not open enough to seal very well. And in fact, what's happening is just the edge of the pipe is contacting that. Now, another problem we have too is these holes don't line up with these holes here. So you would have to remove some material on either side in order for this to work. This is the old flange here, and you can see how it's bent and warped from tightening it up because of the design. This is the end of the factory manifold right here. And in some cases, what the factory does is they make like this lock nut here, or they put that metal on there as a stop. So when this contacts the side of the exhaust pipe, then you don't need a wrench there, and then you can get it out. Problem is you've got to get your hand up in here, hold this nut in place while you're trying to assemble it. What I've done in the past is I make these T-bolts here, and all that is a piece of round stock welded to the head of the bolt. That's going to come in here, and we're going to tighten it up. Now, we just showed you that that flange was bent, and that's also why these bolts are bent. So the bolts get bent, the flange gets bent. I'm suggesting that it's maybe not the best design out there. I got a piece of flat plate there, and I used a 3-inch hole saw, and I cut my hole in, and once I've got my plate shaped, we can line it up and fit it over top of here. Now we'll just bolt that flat. This whole flat will contact this, all this contact area. Another thing I'm going to do is, you see my black line there, well, I'm gonna cut that back a little further to open that up. I don't want to cut it right off to the bottom, but I do want to cut it down to open it up a little more and get rid of this wow that we've got in there. And once we've trimmed that down, what I have is this piece here. So this is my adapter. It's a 3-inch. That was our 3-inch hole saw cut to a 2.5. And then that's going to fit over top of there. And we're simply going to bolt that into place like so. Getting back to this piece here with either our floating nut here with this locking mechanism or the T-bolt that I've built, this is good, but a fastened nut on here is better. I got some Large Boss nuts here, and I welded those onto the flange. Lined everything up, welded them onto the flange. This is stainless. This is some kind of alloy, and it does have some magnetism to it when I checked with the magnet, and I was able to weld it, but I had to play with the welder to make that work. In order to get that to weld pretty decent, what I had to do was preheat it. So I preheat the area, and then I had to adjust the welder so that I got a good bead on there. Another thing that I've tried is I've used these Allen head bolts. The reason that I did it was when you have a normal bolt like this, sometimes the head will snap off of there. The idea behind using this bolt was that you're basically an extension of the shaft of the bolt here is your applied force when you're kind of like tightening it and loosening it. Whereas with the head on this, you've got maybe a failure point. These bolts get hot and cold all the time, and lots of times they'll end up shearing or breaking, or you'll have problems with them because it gets seized and stuff. And it's just the heating cooling cycle of the exhaust, really. So I chose stainless steel to resist corrosion. I understand that stainless steel and stainless steel and the cast of the block might not be good, because sometimes you'll get dissimilar metals will gall and they'll seize that way. So I made sure that all the threads were chased really well, tap out the holes, chase the threads on the bolts, use anti-seize compound on there so that they'll come out when you want to take them out. And the idea being is that maybe the head won't break off of there. I highly doubt. I've never seen a head break off of an Allen head bolt yet. They worked. That's the good news, is that they worked and everything like that. But another thing that was interesting is if we take a look at some of these bolts, one of the things happened is that they're slightly bent in here. So we've got all our bolts bending, and I do believe that could be from the, because of the heat, right, from the exhaust. So I'm not recommending that this is maybe the way to go. This was just something that I tried. It seemed to have worked. I'm kind of throwing it out there if anybody else thinks that it's a decent idea or not. I don't know if I'm going to continue with it, but yeah, just something different. Got some pipes laying on the floor here. We've got a couple things going on. First of all, what we did was we measured the outside diameter of all these pipes, just out of curiosity and to do some math and find out exactly what we got. Looking up the front here, this is an old exhaust pipe off an LA engine. This is the one we removed from the truck, so this is from the Magnum. What I did was I measured the pipes, and we want to do a calculation to find out what our volume is. So volume equals pi r squared h. We don't worry about the h, which is the height or the length of the pipe. We're just kind of narrowing it down to the diameter of the pipe and see what our number comes out to. When I take that number, I'm going to divide it by 2, multiply it by itself, and then multiply it again by 3.14. The first one we got here, and this is off the Magnum, so it measured out at 2.230 outside diameter on the pipe here, and when we did that calculation, we've got a volume of 3.9. When we did this one here, we measured 1.975, and we ended up with a volume of 3.061. Now this, to me, is kind of interesting, because in theory, if the Magnum engine simply got a larger exhaust installed on it, being the same displacement engine, say 318, 360 in the LA version or the Magnum, just a difference in exhaust may have bumped up that horsepower a little bit. Kind of interesting if that is the case, and I do think it makes a difference. This one here we measured out at 2.175, and the volume ends up being 3.713. I bought a bunch of larger pieces of pipe like this in different angles, 90 degree, 45, 20 degree, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to rebuild this section of pipe out of the larger pipe. But when we get to the numbers here, we're looking at the outside measurement on this one was 2.520, and we've got a volume of 4.985. When we put this larger pipe in, it's only a 1/4 inch larger than that one, because that's 2 1/4 and this is 2 1/2, you know, rounding off numbers. We take a look at the volume, we've gained over 1 inch of volume just by increasing the pipe size by a 1/4 inch. Pretty interesting. Thought I'd throw that out there just if anybody else was interested. Here's that exhaust header here. We have trimmed off that little bit of extra all the way around, and we've built our piece there that bolts on. It's just going to fit on there, and we'll bolt that into place. Now when we put our stub piece on there, that's going to be bolted on, and then this is supposed to be the shape of the pipe for this side of the engine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to replicate that shape of pipe with a larger one. So I've just got this larger one here, and then that is going to fit into there, and I will trim it as I need to make that shape and make it work. I'm going to fit it into the truck, and then I'll just get a marker, and I'm just going to make some reference marks on here, and I'll bring it back to the shop, weld things up. And it's going to be tedious, but it's the way it's got to be done. Fit, adjust, tack, weld, fit, adjust until it's all done. The bolt package that we received with the headers here is not going to work for us because these fasteners are too large. I do like the small hex on there, that does help out, which is a reminder why I don't like headers, is because you can't fit your wrench in there on some of the bolts to either install them or remove them. It becomes too time consuming to get at a couple of bolts. It's totally impractical, but I've committed to use these headers, so we're going to use them. And if that's the case, this is the best choice I can find, which is like a grade 8 bolt. So the more slashes it has on the head, the stronger the bolt is. The reason behind that is so I'm not going to be worried about the bolt, the head of the bolt breaking off when we're removing it. So it's a stronger bolt. It shouldn't break when we go to remove it. Again, what I want to do is I want to make sure all our threads are clean, and chase the threads if you have to, and tap out the holes on the head and make sure everything goes in by hand. We got some hardware on the table here, so we're going to go through that and explain what it's all about. The first thing is, what I like to do is I like to take a nut and drive it down to the head on a bolt, and that just gives me a little more meat to get my tools on, a socket or a wrench or whatever, especially for exhaust bolts where they're way up there, hard to get. So that's what these are for. You can use Loctite or just simply drive that nut down as hard as it'll go, and it should stay in place for you. And then now you've got some more meat for your socket or your wrench or what have you. These ones here for the exhaust flange off of the headers. And these ones here are going to be for our hangers for the exhaust piping. This was the factory hanger that was on the passenger side rear holding up the exhaust. You can see this was the piece that was tacked to the pipe there. I'm not able to use that because of the configuration of it, so what I did was I just simply kind of copied it with a simple design. We've got the same width here, and all I did was just take a piece of angle iron and then I made that notch in there, same as here. And then I put it in place, found out where my holes needed to be, drilled those holes in, welded some captive nuts on the other side, same as what we have going on here. And now what I do is I just put my bent rod in here, and then these are my kind of isolators that I purchased for the job. There's a comparison there of the top being the original one and the bottom being the one that I made. Everything is still currently tacked in place because we're still doing some fitting. The bottom of this will still have to be shaped so that it will be attached to the exhaust pipe. So 2 rear hangers, I made 2 of these, the dual exhaust, one on either side. Another thing I did was I repurposed the exhaust pipe that was coming out for the single exhaust. So this is a 3-inch exhaust, and that Dynamax muffler we have, that's a 3-inch in double in and double out. So I needed some 3-inch piping, and what I did was I needed the angles. I can't buy, say, a 45 or 90 degree or 20 degree piping locally here, so I had to make do with what I have. So I removed this, and it was enough 3-inch pipe out of the back there that I could make it work for my purposes. Just repurpose what you have, use what you got kind of thing. So this is just an example of me marking it, cutting it, welding it to create the shape that I wanted. Now we get into some more hangers. There's all kinds of different kinds of hangers. I don't know why they're not the same, but again, we're just figuring out what we're gonna do with what we got and make something work. Originally, the exhaust piping will have like this big round stock on there, and I've bent this 90 here. This is pretty heavy material to try to be working with here. I got this thinner rod here, and this would be a 3/8 rod. So that's easier to bend. I don't need to heat it up. I don't need to put a lot of force into trying to bend it. I can cold bend that with basically a snipe. If somebody's worried that this isn't strong enough, for the first thing is that, oh, they, you know, somebody might think that that's not heavy enough material, because this is the factory stuff. What I did in that case was I just took these and I just tacked them together, 2 of them, and I tacked them together. Another reason I do it that way is that this can be adjusted. You can break your tacks, you can spread it apart, you can bring it together and get that length that you need for this and this right here, and then you can tack it into place. Once everything is good, then I'll put a stitch of weld in there on both sides, this side, and you know, that should be just as strong as this material here. For these hangers, what I did was I made this single rod, I bent it, I installed it, and then I made some reference marks on there on where I needed to make things work. So then what I did was I made these 2 pieces here. And the second part of this is you'll see that my hole is larger because it is meant to fit the larger round stock here. Again, what I did was I just made a bushing, and this is a 3/8 rod, and that's a 1/2 inch kind of pipe or whatever, and I bored it out and then I pressed that on there, and this ain't coming off. That diameter matches this, but yet we still have a thinner rod that we can work with a lot easier. And then I basically match up my marks there. And this mark here goes to that one. And then you'll see here, those 2 holes line up with those. So again, we've got some bushings pressed on here. We don't need one there because the one in the truck is actually a 3/8. Another confusing thing, I don't know why some are this size and some are 3/8. They're all different, but again, we're working with what we have, right? These will be the hangers that will go there. We've got 4 hangers in the back. We've got 2 hangers above the exhaust pipe. We have 1 hanger over by the transmission. And then we'll just have our 2 flanges up on the headers up front there. So those are all the connections to hang the exhaust in the truck, factory locations. I think we're at a state here where all we need to do now is just going to use the welder to tack everything underneath the truck where it sits, and then we can remove it and then seam weld everything. This is where I'm reminded why I don't like headers and why I don't use them. I haven't had anything to do with any headers for years, and I'm reminded why. Because you cannot get in there to use any tools to get the bolts on. It's an absolute horror show. So you have to make wrenches, something like this, whatever you can get to get in there and try and get at them bolts. There's 2 back in there. They're practically inaccessible. But we've got the header on the driver's side. And then over here on the passenger side, we've got the header on as well. This one doesn't seem to be as bad, but at least 2 bolts on each header are practically impossible to manage. Here underneath is the driver's side header going to our collector, and then I have our series of pipes which I've marked and tacked. So this is the first flange here. And then it comes down and goes around the transmission pan and then heads out the back. Might be hard to tell, but what I've done is I tried to achieve a gap in there so that you can get at all these bolts if you ever had to remove your transmission pan. And if not, then we have 2 connections here where we could remove the section of pipe out of the way. We have a connection right there, and then back to the manifold here. Once you remove those 2 connections, this pipe should come out of your way if you needed to remove it. And we do have some good access for the starter, but even if you wanted to remove it to work on the starter, you could do that as well. Over here on the passenger side, that's the collector going to our pipes. And then the pipe comes down, and then it just keeps going until we have our connection right there. So on the right side is the driver's side, and on the left side is the passenger side. Right there is one of our hangers. That'll be on the driver's side pipe. As we come in over on this side, that's where our flange is, our connection. The access for those flanges is in through here, easily accessed. And then this is where we're repurposing our tailpipe, which is 3-inch, to connect into our Dynamax muffler. We got 2 in and 2 out. And then that's where it starts to exit the muffler. We have another 2 connections right there. This whole muffler section would be removable and replaceable. Here's where it's exiting the back, and it's going up over our rear differential. These are the factory mounts right here, supports for the 2 tailpipes going. This is on the front of the differential here. There's the differential there. Here's our hangers here going up. And we also have a hanger above the muffler as well. Coming into the back here, here's those 2 pipes coming up. They're coming up over the differential there. Driver's side is kicked over this way. We've got another one of our hangers is right there. And then it comes out, exits it outside of the tow package here. And then there it is. That might be a better look at our hanger system from the back here. There's the top. It goes down, connects to that one, and connects to that one there. The piping continues on this way. And then there's our hanger on the passenger side. And then it's exiting out again outside the tow package. It is coming outside the vehicle here. As it stands right now, this is just all kind of tacked into place because we're assembling it and we're trying to make it all fit, and we're just tacking all the pipes. And we've got some over here tacked too, and this was so when we were setting it up, we put our levels on, make sure everything's level when we installed our hangers here, and everything's all good. And now we can remove it and we could seam weld everything. But before I do that, I'm just gonna take a look underneath here, and if there's anything else that needs to be tacked in place, then I'm gonna tack it before we remove it, so we don't have anything kind of shifted or moved out of place. Now there's one last thing to consider here, and I don't have the bungs to weld into the pipe yet for the oxygen sensors, but we'd have to choose a pipe here and weld our bungs in. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it on this one here, because this one should be fairly easily removed, and then weld those 2 bungs in there, and then we can thread in our oxygen sensors. But I don't have them at this moment. I have to try and seek those out. Just going to do a little review here before we take this thing for a spin. What we had to do is our air cleaner here, because the headers are different than the factory exhaust manifolds. We just had to redo our little link there, put a little twist in it, and re-bolt it right there. Before it was on that bolt over there, and obviously it can't fit there, so we did that. No big deal, everything's good that way. Again, I do not like the headers. You're lucky if you can get a couple of the bolts torqued properly. You can't get wrenches, tools in there. It's a real nightmare. Nobody should spend half an hour to put a bolt in. If I had remembered that, I would have not used the headers just for the maintenance value of it. But let's hope it's worth the sacrifice and get the performance that we're looking for out of it. Again, on this side, we've got the headers all installed. This one is actually worse than the other side. There's about 2 bolts and they're extremely hard to get at. Pretty happy underneath here. We got lots of space. We can get in here with a ratchet and lots of extensions. We don't need any swivels, and that's on both sides. So everything turned out well that way. I ended up putting a connection right here in the center because this pipe is so long and twisty that it's a bit of a pain in the ass to try and get out if you don't separate it at this location here. So that was a little extra thing that I done. Again, in here we can get at that easy with extensions. We don't need any swivels or anything like that, even on the back side. And we have our piping going in that way. Right here, what I did was I staggered the connections, one, so you don't get it mixed up or turn this thing backwards or something like that. And also so that you can actually put the V-bands on and take them off easily, because it's a little tighter space over here than there is on the other end. I also wrote on the bottom the size of the wrench you need to get at them. They're different. The one on the front is a 10 mil, these are 13 mil. Our piping continues, comes back, goes to the muffler here. Also, you can see this thing is solid, like it is really in there. So I used all the factory connections for that and everything is good. Those are the ones on top of the muffler there. We've got one right here by the transmission, and that's just for this pipe here, but this pipe is connected to the muffler, which is connected to that. So I feel that this connection basically kind of does the job for both there. When we're exiting our muffler here, we get back to our rear connections right there. Same thing, those V-band clamp things. Another thing I did was I put these little rods in there to help keep the distance on these, and so they don't twist or anything like that. Again, here's our factory hangers here for the rear. This is just on the back side of the muffler and the beginning of the rear pipes going up the back. Try to get a decent look here. So here's our exhaust piping. I got them split out either side there. And what I don't like is how close the pipe is to the tire here. There's one of our hangers there, and again, factory location. Here's the hanger on the other side, factory location again. We've got some clearance here for the tire on this side. This is the driver's side. And we got a little bit of clearance here on this side, but this is the passenger side. But I feel that that's kind of closer than I'd like it to be. So maybe in the future, what I might do is I might do some tweaking back here on some of these exhaust pipes. But for the time being, we got to get this thing finished and running and usable so we can use it. So that'll have to be sooner rather than later, but we can't leave it too long. Here it is chugging in front of the house here, so you can get an idea on what it sounds like.